Hello everyone, Quentin here with Eagle 3D Streaming. We have a great video for you today. In this video, we're going to show you how to pixel stream a multiplayer project. Let's jump right into it. Now that you have successfully connected two PCs running your application to the dedicated server for multiplayer, you're ready to take the next step and now pixel stream from these PCs to anyone over the internet so that now you can have multiplayer through a browser. In order for us to take this next step, let's first see how we got here. The first thing we did was we ran the two instances locally and we had a dedicated server. There were two total components. You had your Unreal Engine application and the dedicated server. The next thing we did was we separated these components, where we had your Unreal Engine application running in separate PCs as well as a separate PC for the dedicated server. Now for us to take the next step where we are going to pixel stream the output out from these PCs rather than playing it locally, we need to introduce two new components to our setup. The first component is a matchmaker. And if you've ever played games like Battlefield or Call of Duty, you know that the matchmaker is the thing responsible for routing requests when I would like to connect to an instance to an available instance for playing. In the context of pixel streaming, the matchmaker serves whenever I connect to my setup, I will connect to it through a URL. I enter in the IP address of the matchmaker and the matchmaker takes over from there. It will route the request to an available PC and then that PC will begin streaming the output to the users. So the matchmaker serves as the component responsible for receiving requests to play the game and then routing them to an available streamer. The other thing that we need is a signaling server. And the signaling server is the component responsible for communicating between the matchmaker, the Unreal Engine application, and the user that would like to stream that application. Now that we've introduced the components, let's see how they all relate to each other. In this diagram, you can see all the components that are color-coded the same, how this setup works. Now, I know this is getting a little intense, and by the way, Eagle has a service that does all of this for you at a fraction of the price that can be done in the cloud, so just keep that in mind. But these are the components. Now, you'll notice we have a new PC that I have introduced. And the reason we need that PC is because we need a PC to run the matchmaker. You'll also notice there are some similarities. We still have the dedicated server and we still have our Unreal Engine applications. But the things that we have now introduced are 1, the signaling server, and 2, the matchmaker. So let's go back and just double check to make sure we can fully understand this. Previously, we only had two components. And when I say components, these are actual applications that have to be running in order for multiplayer pixel streaming to work. When we first did multiplayer over the internet, we only had these two components. Now we've introduced two additional components which will allow us to stream the output to a user through the browser. We can see those components in this setup. Here's the matchmaker, which will run on its own PC, and here are the signaling servers, which will run on the same PC that has the Unreal Engine application. In order for this setup to work, you will need an additional PC for your matchmaker, and it will also have to have a static IP address. Whenever you're streaming, it's kind of a standard to have static IPs for everything, or it will be things can break. So just keep that in mind every single one of your PCs should have a static IP if you would like this to be successful and consistent. Now that we have our setup and we've taken a look at the architecture, we can now begin the process of building it up and deploying it. Another thing to keep in mind is that we have a much more detailed video on how to set up your matchmaker and your signaling servers to connect over the internet. I'm going to go fairly quick over these concepts because we already have a great detailed video of it, but I will still do step by step just in case you'd like to follow this video. We will be going faster, but you will have the information. But just the concepts won't be as explained as much. Okay, now that we know our architecture, let's get to work. Here I have the 4 PCs running necessary for me to have multiplayer and pixel streaming as well. Let's take a quick look at the architecture. I have also these 4 PCs. My matchmaker PC, dedicated server PC, and then the 2 PCs that will be running my Unreal Engine application as well as the signaling server. I've organized them the same way for you. In other words, this top left one is my matchmaker, this top right one is my dedicated server, and these bottom 2 are my PCs that I will be running the Unreal Engine application on. Before we get started, one thing that you might want to include in your checklist is note down the static IP of every single one of your PCs. It will definitely be helpful later on. You'll also need to note down the ports that your HTTP, matchmaker, streamers, SFU are all listening on. And again, we have a very detailed video on this, so I'm going to not explain the concepts behind these, but just for your checklist, make sure that you have all this information listed that you're seeing right here before proceeding with your setup. We have 4 total PCs, and across those PCs we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 applications that we need to run. So in order to do multiplayer pixel streaming, you can look at it as I need 4 total PCs, and on those PCs I will have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total applications running. And the way that I'm going to take you through this is I'm literally just going to start all 6 of these applications and multiplayer pixel streaming will start working. Let's start with the matchmaker. I'm going to go to my matchmaker PC and I will maximize it so I can work easily. I'm going to go into my starting file, and again, this same starting file that I have used up until now is also going to be used for the matchmaker. And that's why it's so nice just to have both your dedicated server and your Windows application, Unreal Engine application, in the same folder, because now I can use the same file everywhere. The other thing that you'll need to have done to your Unreal Engine application is to have pixel streaming enabled, the pixel streaming plugin. We also have a video on how to enable the pixel streaming plugin, but when you do your build, make sure that the pixel streaming plugin is enabled or this setup will not work. Okay, let's go ahead and set up the matchmaker. I go to my Unreal Engine application, then I go to the name of my project, samples, pixel streaming, web servers, get PS servers, and I double click on that, which will load all of my servers. And you'll see I now have my matchmaker and I have my signaling server. If we go and we look at our architecture again, you can see that we're focusing on our matchmaker right now. So let's set up the matchmaker. I double click on matchmaker, platform scripts, CMD, run. After I double click run, you'll see that the matchmaker is being set up, and I simply wait for it for it to be completed. I'll allow if it asks. And we now have the Matchmaker setup. The Matchmaker is actually pretty easy to set up. This is all you have to do. And you'll now see that it's running when you see the messages HTTP listening on 90 and Matchmaker listening on port 9999. Okay, that's it for the Matchmaker. The next thing, and again, so now you'll see that I have this application, 1 out of our 6 applications running. The 6 being the Matchmaker, dedicated server, signaling server, UE app, second signaling server, second UE app. I now have 1 of the 6 running, so we're making progress. Next, I'm going to go to my dedicated server. So here is my dedicated server. Because I've got these organized, these 4 PCs are literally these 4 that we see in the architecture. Let's go to my dedicated server and let's start the dedicated server. I'm now in my dedicated server PC and I'm going to the exact same file because I'm using these 2 files for my entire setup. So important to prepare this beforehand. I'll double click on Windows Server and I will double click on my shortcut for my dedicated server, and now we have this up and running. So far so good and pretty easy. If we go back to our architecture, we now have 2 of the 6 Unreal Engine 2 of the 6 applications running. Our Matchmaker and dedicated server are now running. Making progress. Let's go now to our first PC and let's start our signaling server and Unreal Engine application. As you know by now, this bottom left corresponds to my first PC that I am going to use for streaming. So I will select it and I will maximize it so it's easier to work, and then I will double click on my starting folder, and then I will open up my Unreal Engine application. Now, as I've mentioned, there are 2 total applications that I need to run: the signaling server and the Unreal Engine application. I'm going to run these through BAT files. And again, I explain this BAT file setup, the reasons behind it, why we are adding certain information into the BAT files in our setting up multi-user pixel streaming. So please have a look at that video if any of this is confusing. But since we're moving through the steps fairly quick, just know that we have 2 applications that we need to run. And I'm going to run these through BAT files because it's the easiest and most efficient way to do this. So let's now set up our BAT files for both the signaling server and the Unreal Engine application. To save time, I've already created them right here, but we'll do this. We'll go ahead, and if you're not familiar with how to create a BAT file, let's right click and let's right click and say new text document, and then let's create the BAT file for the signaling server. And again, what I am doing is I am now creating a BAT file that is going to run my signaling server, which I have done right here. I'm going to right click on it and say edit with notepad, and I'll clear all this out so that it's nice, neat, and clean. Now you can see that there's nothing here. I have, however, created my BAT file beforehand, so this is easier, so I'm going to also load that. And so now you can see what I've done. What I've done is I'm basically running the start signaling server PowerShell script, which will start my signaling server. And so I've created a BAT file that will run this specific application, this PowerShell application, and then I've added some arguments necessary for pixel streaming. I'm not going to explain these in this video because we have it in our multi-user pixel streaming video. So all I'm going to do is copy all this information and paste it into my bat file that I have at the root of this folder. And that's important that you place this bat at the root of this folder because I'm using a relative folder location to start this application. Now, of course, your root, this setup will be a little different. The name of your Unreal Engine project will change. Since my name is DS Test 2, that's the reason why I've put that there. But yours is going to be different. I'll provide this this bat file command in the description, but just know that you'll have to update this for your actual project. Now that I've added that information in, let's go ahead and save it. And then let's also create our bat file for our Unreal Engine executable. Going back to the architecture, we've now created our bat file that will start our signaling server. We also are going to create a bat file to start our Unreal Engine application. And I'm just using bat files because it's easier when you're setting this up for pixel streaming. There's multiple ways to do it. I prefer the bat file. Okay, this one's done. Let's create our second bat file. I have also created this beforehand, but I will create it from scratch, and I'll just call this start UE app.bat. Okay, and then I'll right click on it and edit with Notepad++. Oh, and I use Notepad++. There's lots of different editors you can use. I'm just using this one because it's simple and free. Okay, so let's take a look at the bat file that I made in advance. This one's fairly straightforward. The first part is the name of your Unreal Engine executable that you want to run, in this case DS Test 2. And then I have some arguments that I include which are necessary for pixel streaming. I'm going to copy all of this and paste it into my new bat file and click save. And I will close all of this. Okay, so now you have your two bat files necessary to run the two applications needed for multiplayer pixel streaming. Before we run those, if you notice what we did for the Matchmaker, we have to first set up pixel streaming. So I'm going to go to the name of my project, samples, pixel streaming, web servers, get psservers.bat. I'll select run anyway and wait for the installation to complete. The next thing that I'm going to do before I run my bat files is I need to make one modification to the config.json file. I will right click on the config.json file and you will see that I have a list of arguments. The argument that I need to modify is the Matchmaker address. Well, what do I put here? If we go back to our architecture, I have listed the IP address. I have listed the name of my Matchmaker IP address right here. So I actually know what the IP address is beforehand, which makes this step easy. I just simply go over here and I will type in that address in this field, 176.97.35. Okay, now that I have my Matchmaker IP address added right here, I will go ahead and maximize this. Then I'll right click and save and close. All right, now that we have set up our pixel streaming files by going to DS Test Samples, Pixel Streaming, Web Servers, Get PS Servers, I ran that. I also went to Signaling Web Server and modified my config.json file to have my Matchmaker address. And I've also created my two bat files. Now I'm ready to actually start running things. Okay, so we have the bat file for the signaling server and the Unreal Engine application. Let's now start both of those programs using these bat files that we created. I'll double click on start signaling server.bat to start the signaling server. I allow if it asks, and then I close. And we can see that not only has the signaling server connected, it has also connected to the Matchmaker, which is awesome. If we go to this diagram, we see that we have our Matchmaker, and if we go to this PC, we'll notice that we have now added a connection to the Matchmaker, which is great. Now, we have the signaling server running. The last thing that we need to do is have our Unreal Engine application running. I go back into my first streaming PC and I'll maximize it. And now I will start my second bat file to start my Unreal Engine application. Now, because I'm doing it as a bat file, you'll see a command window that looks similar to this, and it won't be readily obvious that your UE application is running. The way that I like to check and confirm that it is I just start my Matchmaker and confirm that my Unreal Engine application is running. Okay, now I have my Unreal Engine application and my signaling server running. So let's check in on the architecture. I have my Matchmaker already running, as well as my dedicated server. Now I have also started the signaling server and the Unreal Engine application on my first streaming PC. That means that I now have a total of 4 of the 6 necessary applications running. The last thing for me to do is to set up my signaling server and Unreal Engine application on my second streaming PC. In order for me to do that, I have my second streaming PC here in the bottom right, and now I'm going to start the signaling server and Unreal Engine application. I select my second streaming PC and maximize it for it to be easier to work, and I go into my root folder of my Unreal Engine application. The first thing that I need to do is to set up my bat files. And since I've already shown you how to do this using the first PC, and this for setting up my second one, I'm just going to simply move them into place so that we have them in position. The next thing that I need to do is also start or install and set up all of the Pixel streaming servers. So I go into Windows, the name of my project, Samples, Pixel Streaming, Web Servers, and then I double click on Get PS Servers, and I will click Run Anyway. Once that's finished setting up, I will then go into Signaling Web Server, and I will go to my config.json file, and I have to do the same thing, which was specify my Matchmaker IP address. I'm going to minimize this so I can look and see what it is, and I see that it's 198.176.9735. So I go down to Matchmaker address and I type in 198.176.97.35. I right click on my config.json and I save it, and then I close everything so that it's nice, neat, and organized. Okay, let's go back to your application and let's first start the signaling server. And we'll wait for it to install and start running. I'll allow if I'm prompted. And now we see that not only has the signaling server connected, but it's also connected to our Matchmaker. Going back to our architecture, our Matchmaker is in the top left, so I'm going to maximize this just to show you. Here's the first connection, and now we have the second connection. I will minimize this and briefly go over what we've done. We now have the Matchmaker running. We have our dedicated server for multiplayer running. And we now have the signaling server and Unreal Engine application running on both streaming PCs. So we have now all 6 applications running. Oh, shoot, I forgot. Okay, let me start my Unreal Engine application as well. Sorry guys, I forgot to do that. Okay, now I have all of my 6 applications running. And I will go into Task Manager just to confirm. There it is. Okay, now we've got all 6 running. Now that I've confirmed that I have all 6 of these applications running, the last thing for us to do is to pixel stream multiplayer over the internet. The way that I do that is I want to connect to my Matchmaker, because my Matchmaker is going to be the one responsible for setting up the streaming. I'll connect to my Matchmaker, which will then route me to an available streaming instance. And once I'm connected to that, the signaling server will then be the middleman in terms of streaming my Unreal Engine application to me. So how do I connect to my Matchmaker? It's actually really easy. I just specify the IP address into my browser tab, and I also specify the port because this is the port that the Matchmaker is listening on. Here I have a standard Google browser tab, and this is now on my local PC. When I say local PC, all of these PCs in my setup are in the cloud. So none of these are running locally on my desktop. These are all cloud PCs, somewhere in the United States. Now I am bringing up my browser tab that is running locally on my computer, and I'm going to use this to demonstrate pixel streaming multiplayer over the internet. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to simply enter in the name, the IP address of the Matchmaker, and specify the port. So I'll do that by typing in 198.176.97.35:90, and I'll press enter. And I will click to start, and we see that I have my first instance of Unreal running. And you'll also notice that the IP address has changed because now it's connected to who? Well, I can go here and see it's connected to this PC. All right, making progress. Let's open a second tab now. And this time I'm going to enter in again the Matchmaker address. And when I say the Matchmaker address, that is the IP associated with my Matchmaker. So I'm going to enter that in, and that is 198.176.97.35:90, and I'll press enter. When that happens, you'll notice that again my IP address has changed because now it is connected to the other streaming PC that I have a signaling server and Unreal Engine application running. If I then look at these side by side, you can see I now have my 2 instances of my pixel streaming running. You'll also notice they're not connected multiplayer. The last thing we need to do is now to connect these to our dedicated server. If we look at our architecture, we have our dedicated server here along with the IP address associated with it. We'll use the same approach that we used in our previous video of how we connected locally in order to connect to our dedicated server. So I will type in open and then the IP address of my dedicated server. Let's go to our first streamer that is streaming our first browser tab that is streaming to and from this PC. Let's go to our streamer. Let's go to our first browser tab that is connected to the streamer, and we will type the tilde key, and then we will type in open, and then the IP address of our dedicated server. Open 3.128.98.118, and I'll press enter. Once I press enter, let's quickly check out what's going on our multiplayer server. You'll notice that a join has succeeded from my Pixel Streaming streamer, which is excellent. Okay, so we now have the first browser tab connected to multiplayer. The last thing that we need to do, of course, is to connect our second streamer to the dedicated server, because they currently cannot see each other since they're not both yet connected. In order to connect my second streamer, I'll do the exact same thing. I go and I check my dedicated server IP address. Then in the second streamer, I go here, I press tilde, and then I'll type in open 3.138.98.118, and I'll press enter. And we now see that we have successfully set it up. Now you have both players connected to each other while Pixel streaming. Now, if you want a much simpler and straightforward and easy way to do this, Eagle 3D Streaming has all of this set up and automated for you. All you literally have to do is upload your dedicated server. So you'll zip it up for Windows, upload it to our platform, and then once it's uploaded, you can start your dedicated server and you will immediately have multiplayer running. So I have my two instances starting up, and we have everything set up on the back end so that these two will immediately connect and via multiplayer. Another thing to mention is we have a free open source template, which I am sharing with you right now on the screen, so that you can automate multiplayer setup within the engine, within your Unreal Engine project as well. So this is going to, now that the concepts of multiplayer are understood, this is going to rocket ship your development. We do have a 7-day trial if you're interested in trying us out. This is Quentin Anderson with Eagle 3D Streaming. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to set up multiplayer with Pixel Streaming, and we will see you in the next developer series. Thank you.
Upload your first Unreal Engine project on our Pixel Streaming platform for free. To create an account, go to account.eagle3dstreaming.com/sign up and get a free 7 days trial. Eagle 3D Streaming, it's just easier.